MapleStory gets a lot of hate, most of it for good reason. But one thing the game does really well that I think we all just kind of take for granted is the fact that this is a game with over 50 classes which are all visually and mechanically distinct, and yet every single one of them is completely viable. That isn't to say they're all perfectly balanced, but I think we often get lost in conversations about class balance when we're talking about extreme outliers, and we forget that in the overwhelming majority of circumstances, MapleStory is a game where you can scroll past the mixed review label on Steam, fire up the game for the first time, pick any of the dozens of classes the game presents you with, and take that character all the way to the farthest reaches of the end game without ever being walled out because of your choice 2,000 hours ago. In fairness, plenty of other modern MMOs have achieved a similar level of balance, but they usually do it through significant mechanical homogenization. MapleStory isn't completely exempt from that, but even still I can't think of any others that manage to achieve anywhere near this level of relative class balance with anywhere near this quantity of options to balance between. There are a few reasons why I think MapleStory can pull this off, but I mostly just want to acknowledge what a genuine feat this is. There was a time where MapleStory was cranking out 2 to 3 classes a year. Okay, hold on, I gotta re-record this part. So I wrote this section, I said 2 to 3 classes a year. I thought that that was like a good kind of semi-hyperbolic but still accurate thing. And then when I'm on the MapleStory wiki here, getting like these pictures to show what classes came out when, they have their page that is classes by release date, I see 2012 and 2013 where they had 6 classes released in those years. And in 2012 one of them was Jet and they crossed it out, fair enough. But in 2013, that's still like just actually 6 classes that are in the game. So I guess revise my statement, there was a time where they were releasing 2 to 6 classes a year. And during the time immediately following the Big Bang patch, I think balance suffered. I remember getting absolutely rolled by Mercedes and Demon Slayer players in PvP back in 2012, which is a really surreal thing to say in retrospect. But as time went on, Nexon has put in the effort to go back and revamp, remaster, and redo most of the jobs until we finally reached a point where no one feels considerably left behind. Classes are my favorite part of games. I'm barely joking. That's why it's always disappointing to me when games water down their classes in order to make them more similar in the name of balance. But as with everything in game design, the best solution depends on the game you're trying to make. So this got me thinking, how does MapleStory manage to preserve its class's uniqueness while still holding to the philosophy that no one should intentionally be more capable than anyone else? I ultimately think the answer to this question lies in how MapleStory chooses to differentiate and divide its classes. Every job in MapleStory can broadly be divided into several archetypes. Nowadays, games tend to divide their classes into the holy trinity of tank, healer, and DPS, and depending on the game, this distinction is often the main influence as to how they play. In Final Fantasy XIV, every job within each role has functionally identical versions of the same skills, in addition to their own literally identical role actions. MapleStory has no such division. While there are classes that fulfill the same fantasy as traditional MMO roles, MapleStory is ultimately a game designed for solo play, where each character is meant to be entirely self-sufficient. Generally speaking, MapleStory's classes are designed to be less synergistic between each other, and are instead almost closer to something like a fighting game character. My point isn't that MapleStory classes don't have any overlap. There's an entire category of common skills that multiple classes can use. 6 Job as a whole almost single-handedly tears down any argument against ability overlap. The point I'm trying to make is that instead of hard roles, MapleStory's archetypes are more like tags. Every class belongs to more than one archetype, but these archetypes are often mutually exclusive. Every class is either A or B, but it can also be C or D in addition to A or B. And of course, that's before we even consider E or F. Look, this is getting stupid. Let's just start with our first example. Our first and probably most important category relates to the most foundational aspect to the feel of a class. Do they teleport, or do they flash jump? Teleportation is pretty self-explanatory. You hold a direction, push a hotkey, and your character stops being where they currently are, and instead starts to be somewhere else, a short fixed distance, in whatever direction you were holding. Flash jumping is only slightly more complicated. Named after the old-school hermit skill, flash jump is basically just a badass way of saying double jump. You jump, and then you jump again, automatically propelling you in the direction your character's facing. The distance and angle you travel is momentum-based, so there are a few different techniques you can use to go further or control your jump arc. Every class in the game primarily falls into one of these two categories. There are some classes which can perform both actions, but in general teleportation was historically reserved for mages, while, as previously mentioned, flash jumping was just for the hermit class, before eventually being copied over to every other job that couldn't teleport, effectively making flash jumping the default form of movement. There's also gliding, which is kind of a subcategory of flash jumping, restricted to just 2 classes in the game, but even they have the option to just flash jump instead. On the face of it, these 2 categories might just seem like flavor text, and for what it's worth, in many of the game's situations they basically are. However, in a bossing context, the differences become a lot more pronounced, to the point of distinguishing the capabilities of classes within these categories. Something I think is interesting is that outside of maybe a few circumstances, teleportation is kind of just better. It lets you move through boss attacks, the distance you travel is consistent, it's instant, and you can almost always start moving close to immediately after. However, despite the advantages, community sentiment seems to favor flash jumping classes. It helps that most classes in the game flash jump, but even still, it's not hard to find examples of people overtly preferring this style of movement. I can't say I have a strong bias one way or the other, but there is something to be said for the flexibility and fluidity of flash jumping. Mobbing while flash jumping feels distinct from the more stationary playstyle of teleporting, even if the outcome is ultimately the same. This is a good thing. You have 2 styles of movement, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, which are meaningfully emphasized in gameplay. And they're different enough that players have their own subjective preference between them. There are situations where you would prefer to have one over the other, but you never exactly need either. The distinction between teleportation and flash jumping is a big enough deal that it's one of the main statistics Nexon decides to show you about a class on the character creation screen. It's also the only useful one. Well, I guess there's 2, since we're clearly not getting that unified cash shop. By now you should have a decent idea of what I mean by archetypes. Classes in MapleStory aren't just tanks or healers. There are a concrete set of universal features that have been established over the years, and each new class added to the game either embraces or rejects them until we end up with something that feels at least a little unique. These categories can get extremely granular, but I think it eventually reaches a point where we kind of stop talking about overall class design and instead move more into the realm of individual class features. I don't think Kali and Hayato being able to dash 100 times is a style of movement on par with teleportation, but who knows what the game will look like in 5 years. Let's try to get a bit more avant-garde with our categories. Movement is important, but I'm never gonna liberate this damn Genesis weapon if I can't kill dudes, and that's where our next category comes in. Hurricane? Or, whatever the opposite of hurricane is. Normal, I guess? Also, just to give you an idea of how long I've taken to make this video, I wrote that last line when I wasn't close to liberating this damn Genesis weapon, and now, by the time this video comes out, I will have liberated this damn Genesis weapon. And it's all homegrown, no Genesis pass, I can't afford that, so it's been a long road. I don't know, I just felt like putting this aside in there, whatever. Who gives a shit? Who fucking cares? Named after the iconic Bowmaster skill, A Hurricane class is basically just any job whose main attacking skill attacks at a fixed speed by holding down the key. Many archers are Hurricane classes, but this category also includes Phantom, Corsair, and the newly released Ren. Despite what the government might tell you, there is no law that says you can't just hold down the attack key on a normal non-Hurricane class, but I'm sure you can imagine there's a pretty obvious tactile difference that comes from a skill constantly firing off damage while you hold the button, versus holding the button triggering multiple uses of the same skill. Hurricane classes kinda get a bad rap in MapleStory Global specifically, due to the existence of an overly complicated mechanic colloquially referred to as attack speed 0, but officially codified as attack speed 10 when it was added as a viewable stat on your character screen. To put it simply, different weapons and classes have different attack speeds up to a soft cap. You can't pass the soft attack speed cap unless you use a specific method, most often a Monster Park green potion, which allows your character to reach the hard attack speed cap. Basically, you chug a potion and you attack way faster. This feature only exists in GMS, and it's led to a bit of a discrepancy with how the game is balanced from the Korean version, because all the balancing is done for a version of the game where a select few classes, all of them non-Hurricane, attack slower than they can in GMS. This is the part where I alienate a significant portion of the people who are still watching by commenting on the balance of global MapleStory. So if that's you, then I don't know, I hope you're enjoying your new Hyperburn Ren main. There's a popular sentiment that Hurricane classes are worse in GMS, and while that's technically true, it's kind of a glass half empty perspective because the game is balanced around those classes having Hurricane skills. Objectively speaking, non-Hurricane classes just punch above the fuck me, man. Punch above their weight in GMS due to having access to attack speed 0. Personally, this has never bothered me. I like the feel of Hurricane skills, and I've never felt like they held me back any more than my lack of bossing talent does. I'm more interested in the difference in tactile feel that the two playstyles have, which is probably a lot more in line with how the design is intended for Korea. Ignoring the unintended balancing mistake, I think the two playstyles are cool. In my script, I just ended that sentence with like 7 question marks. I think I was gonna elaborate on that, but I'm not gonna. Wait, that's all I wrote. I can at least come up with a conclusion. Much like the difference between teleportation and double jumping, there is a trade-off that comes with being a Hurricane class. I think that much is true even in GMS. Like I mentioned before, Hurricane classes tend to be more mobile, and in that regard, the fact that they do less damage kind of just intuitively makes sense. I'm kind of talking myself into thinking that attack speed 0 is a good thing, and that Hurricane classes should do less damage, but I don't want to say that. I don't know, let's just move on, this video fucking sucks. I've already made a fool out of myself talking about balance once in this video, so let's do it again with our next category. Damage profiles, and specifically whether they're more of a DPM or a burst damage class. DPM, or damage per minute, is a community term, I guess, that essentially exists in opposition to burst or burst damage. This is going really well. A burst class deals the vast majority of its damage in a short span of time before jumping around the boss arena waiting for their cooldowns, while a DPM class has its damage window more spread out. This distinction has, admittedly, become less emphasized in recent years, thanks to the 6-job update giving every class in the game an immensely powerful 6-minute cooldown cutscene attack, as well as with every job in the game having their burst skill cooldowns aligned to 2 minutes across the board. There are a few reasons for this, but at its core, it's about party play, a subject which I, as someone who has joined probably 2 public parties in my entire MapleStory career, am extremely qualified to talk about. Due to a programming oversight, bosses in MapleStory often don't just stand in one place and let you kill them for free. In an effort to solve this, Nexon eventually had to settle on the Band-Aid solution of giving some classes unique skills to stop bosses from performing any actions for a few seconds. This would ensure players could watch their elaborate animations with skill transparency turned all the way down, uninterrupted. However, this also had the unintended consequence of making some classes still have to play the game, so eventually Nexon had to settle on the Band-Aid solution of adding a generic 5th job skill that any class could use that would replicate the effect of these class-specific bind skills. This has led to our current years-long bind and burst meta. Because bind skills apply a debuff onto their target that prevents them from being stunned again until it wears off, party compositions favored groups that could all benefit from these burst windows the same, meaning you'd want a party with jobs that shared your cooldowns. Conceptually, this is kinda cool, but in practice, it stifled party compositions in a game that probably doesn't need that kind of social friction. Also, by the way, if you're wondering why I'm using class and job interchangeably, it's because Nexon can't even make up their mind about it, so why should I? The changes to burst damage over the years have been in reaction to a single fundamental question that humans and game designers alike have pondered for years. The age-old question of why do damage later when could do damage now? Burst damage is fundamentally better than DPM or DPS or damage over time or whatever you want to call it. If we're both destined to do only 1 million damage, the guy who can crank it out in a single second is going to have an overwhelming advantage over the guy who takes 30 seconds. This has a cascading effect when you add percentage-based damage buffs or, God forbid, party-wide damage buffs. Feel free to Google the fallout of Final Fantasy XIV's own 2-minute meta for more information. The problem I have with burst damage in MapleStory is that it's kind of boring. When every class in the game has access to burst skills that always boil down to just throwing everything in your skill sequence and hitting your win button, it kind of starts to just feel like a formality. Class discords used to have in-depth guides for what order to use your buffs in due to different animations and buff timers, and maybe they still do, but I just throw everything into the sequence, man. Even still, I don't think this does an immense amount of harm to the game, because MapleStory has more going on than just rigid execution of your damage rotation. Despite what may have seemed like me insisting otherwise, there are absolutely still different damage profiles. Every job in the game isn't a Night Lord that does 90% of its damage in 10-second windows every 2 minutes or whatever. The fact that I specifically mention Night Lord as being notably burst-centric is kind of the point. Everyone has burst, some just have more burst. Not only that, but you still have to interact with the boss the majority of the time, as long as you don't just massively outscale them, and the classes which were about rotational complexity are still about rotational complexity. Damn, maybe that should have been a category. Something like easy versus hard. Okay, so this category sucks, but, like, also it kind of doesn't. Some of the classes in MapleStory are just straight up hard. As someone with a level 240-something hyperburned Cadena that I never finished leveling, I've spent hours watching YouTube videos about weapon swap combos. A lot of people really shy away from these classes, but for a certain demographic of deranged individuals, they add a lot of value to the game. There's no reason Blaster and Ren can't coexist in a game with 50-something classes. There are other groups that we could divide jobs into, like support or damage, builder spenders, or summons or no summons, but I think those are too granular to really be helpful in understanding the large differences in how classes feel to play. I think what we've laid out here is a good basis for the different types of classes that MapleStory has. A teleporter with a hurricane skill who relies on burst damage feels distinct from a flash jumper with a hurricane skill who does their damage off burst. Depending on the situation, one type of character may be preferable. Except for burst damage, that's pretty much always preferred. The main thing I want to emphasize about these archetypes that makes MapleStory distinct is that they matter. In other games you have classes with different types of mobility or different ways that they access their power, but MapleStory emphasizes these distinctions almost every moment of playing the game. What movement options you have affects how you grind or how you interact with boss patterns. Holding a key and spitting out lines of damage feels different from attacking repeatedly with different attack speeds. How strong your burst is might affect how much risk you take to squeeze out more damage in between cooldowns. Difficulty might affect whether or not you hyperburn a Ren. Understanding these super general concepts can help us understand why it is that despite having over 50 different classes, they can still feel different from each other, and that kind of design space goes a long way in making sure that having to have like 3 main characters doesn't get tedious. The fact that these distinct categories that play differently and have their own strengths and weaknesses are allowed to exist is part of why, even despite the various homogenization efforts over the years, MapleStory still has good, distinct classes. 50-something of them. 52, I think, don't fact check me. By the way, MapleStory's class design isn't better than other MMOs for lacking a hard roles system. Not having roles is a trade-off, both in terms of class design but also in fight design. The main takeaway from this video should simply be that there is more than one way to design classes beyond the typical Holy Trinity system that's become the default over the years. MapleStory doesn't even have the best class design of any MMO. That title goes to Final Fantasy XI. I will not elaborate. I died and lost XP for this bit. There's more I could say about MapleStory class design, but I think I'm just gonna cop out here. Instead, I'd like to formally announce my intent to go through every class in the game to talk about and review them. Like I said earlier, I am far from qualified to speak at length about class balance, and I don't even really think it's that interesting because it changes so often. Instead, I'd rather focus on the gameplay, aesthetic, and just like the vibe that every class in the game has, since I don't think the actual design of these jobs gets anywhere near the respect it deserves. Something between a Copper-san leveling to 200 video and the FAQ channel on a class Discord. I don't know when I'll do it, I don't know which one I'll start with, and I don't know if it'll be good, but if you manage to make it this far in the video, then I hope you'll watch it when it comes out. But if you don't, thank you very much for watching this one.